Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss the latest, with a tale of two strikes, really, of the many, where one, the Conservative government think they can win, and another, they seem to be quite worried about. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So there are lots of professions striking at the moment this year. So for a decade of real terms pay cuts in the public sector especially means that workers simply cannot afford another massive one this year and then next. But the Tories are not interested in increasing poverty, especially as they come to what is likely to be the end of their time in office. From the government's point of view, they are worried that if they back down to one group of striking workers, they will empower others. And there is one group that is now worrying them: nurses. Now, I've discussed before how, generally speaking, the public can be a bit soft on support for the striking of emergency service workers. But at the end of November, there was a big upturn in support for nurses being able to strike. The latest polling on YouGov now shows a worrying picture for the Tory government and explains why so many Tory MPs are openly saying that the government are going to have to do more for nurses specifically. Up until now, Tories have been happy to be unified in their insistence that public sector workers just starve and freeze and stop complaining. Now things are a little different. The poll shows that 64% of the adult population support the nurses going on strike to just 28% opposed. Now, as I said before, polls like that are worthless politically. Majority opinion counts very little with politicians for two reasons. First, although voters may have a view on certain policy areas, they do not always prioritise them highly with their vote. After all, it's impossible to vote for any party that agrees with you on everything. So voters prioritise some policies over others, and you'll get some people going, well, there's like 80% of the population in favour of this. Why are none of the political parties backing it? And it's usually because they're not that bothered about it. They're sort of, oh yeah, we'd have it if we were given the chance, but we're not going to spend our vote on it. But the second, and this is of crucial importance here, we have a first past the post system, which means politicians are only interested in the views of a very small section of the population, like 1 or 2% at most. So you could show that 80, even 90% of the population are in favour of a particular thing. Makes no difference if the target voters are in the 10 or 20% that are against it. They will hold sway. But when you break this poll down into types of voter, that doesn't help the Tories. 48% of Conservatives support the strikes, compared to 47% against. So fairly evenly split. Doesn't matter that one's 1% higher, even split. But that is across the country. So then you think, so what about in the marginal constituencies, the ones that really matter? It's all right having the safe Tory seats being against the strikers. That doesn't matter. Well, the Tories will have much more detailed polling of that, but you can see from the YouGov that there is 65% support in the north of England and 62% in the Midlands and Wales. Now, these are the regions where the crucial seats for the Tories are. You know, so if they want to avoid a rout in the next election, there's quite a lot of these seats they need to retain. And finally, if you look at the age breakdown, you can see that the older voters, who vote in very large numbers and vote mostly Conservative, so they are of crucial importance to the Tories. Now, they have the lowest level of support for the nurses, which is a little odd because this is the group that needs them the most. But even here, there's 54% for the nurses to only 41% against. So all the indicators from this latest poll are that the public, and the important public, are supporting the nurses. And the Tories need to pay attention to that. And like I say, they will have more detailed polling. They will know exactly what the strength of opinion is in their target areas specifically. This is just national and to a certain extent regional polling. But there are a couple of indicators that it's not much different to what we're seeing here. The first is that various Tory MPs are publicly saying that the government are going to have to do more. That's a major break from the party line so far. The government keep complaining that they can't afford the 19% pay demand which nurses are making, but that is a stupid thing to say because everyone knows they don't need to make that offer to end the strikes. Half of it would almost certainly end the strikes and still represent a significant pay cut since the Tories came to power. And the second is that the Royal College of Nursing have said that if ministers do not back down by this Thursday, I think it is, then the strikes next month will be way greater in scope. As I said before the summer, strikes kicked off. Public opinion is absolutely vital here. And the nurses think that they have got public opinion on their side, and they're going to use it. See, ordinarily, a strike, of course, is simply a way of telling your bosses that, look, it's cheaper to agree a fair settlement than it is to do without our valuable labour during industrial action. So, let's come to an agreement here. But when you're dealing with Conservative MPs who don't care about the economic impact or the effect on public services, which they make it their mission to destroy anyway, the battle is for public opinion. It's a very, very different beast. It's why, if we look at the other notable strike action with the RMT and rail workers, there are, of course, many others, but these have been going on for longer and also making good use of the media. The Conservatives think they're winning that one. See, they have observed that the resolve seems to be waning amongst members who are voting for strike action in smaller proportions now, and also that public opinion, especially of those Conservative voters, which is what matters to them, is not in their favour. So they think they can just tough that one out and they'll win. They think they're doing all right on that. And you may be wondering what the government even think they're going to win out of that, because, they aren't, although they're public sector workers sort of, they're also private sector workers because the rail operators are privately owned, albeit according to a franchise. Well, the Tories are demanding budget cuts from rail companies next year because ticket sales are continuing to struggle. Now, the Conservatives could just demand that, look, you pay your running costs, right? You manage your operations, and then whatever you make on top of it is your profit. But the Tories are all about privatising the profit. So they're not going to tell the rail companies to pay for their stuff first and then take the profit. So if they think costs need cutting to make rail travel more attractive, and they don't want to harm the profits, then of course you can see why they want to crush wages instead. But essentially, politics is about the 3 Ps: persuasion, perception, and power. The strikes right now are an attempt to persuade. In this, usually they're an attempt to persuade the people. It's between the workers and the people who decide what their pay is. On this occasion, it's not. It's the government. The government are trying to persuade the public that they cannot afford the pay demands without whacking up everyone's taxes sky high. If the Conservative government can get the public on their side, they're absolutely fine with the economic hit. They don't mind that. It's only the public opinion that hurts them. So they will say, look, we just can't afford it. We'd like to help, but we can't afford it. Now, this is not true, but that doesn't matter. The strength of the persuasion has got little to do with the validity of the argument. And this is where perception comes into it. Because when you're trying to persuade the public of anything, you cannot shift existing perception very much. If you need to persuade a person one-on-one, you can actually have a wide-ranging discussion, and you can actually shift someone's perception quite a long way. But when you're talking about the general public, no, you cannot shift perception very much at all. The Tories benefit from the fact that much of the important voters have a perception of the public finances working very much like household finances. They don't, of course, but that is the perception. You cannot hope to shift that perception very far from its base if you expect to be persuasive. It's why I constantly try and explain to people who bemoan the positions of various political leaders in various parties, and they go, oh, why they say that? It's not true. It's like, you can rant all you like about economic reality or any other type of reality. Perception is more important in politics. Brexit has shown this to anyone who wasn't aware of it before. But when it comes to perception, the Tories don't have it all their own way. Unions need their persuasion to take the form of their members working hard to provide a vital public service, but not being rewarded with the means to afford the basic cost of living. That they are dealing with rising rents or mortgages, rising food bills, energy bills, which have doubled. Most expensive energy bills in the world, although a lot of people don't necessarily know that, so you can't really factor that into the perception. And now these people can't afford to eat properly or heat their homes. And people can identify with that. You're not having to shift people's perceptions a long way to get them to understand that. And you can tell that the right wing are aware of this concept as well. It's not just me making it up. They have for half a year now tried to conflate RMT members with train drivers. They keep saying, train drivers get really high wages, as if to say, Yeah, they might be getting a real terms pay cut, but they can still afford to live. Of course, the RMT represents rail workers, many of whom are on minimum wage or not above. We're not talking about train drivers. Train drivers did completely different union. That's ASLEF. The RMT is for people who work the ticket office or guards or just cleaners, porters. But the reason why the Tory media tried to deliberately confuse the two and try and tell the public, oh, this is about train drivers, is because they know that the RMT would get way more support amongst the public for workers on £20,000 to £30,000 a year rather than £60,000 to £70,000 a year. So the battle for the RMT was to explain who their members are and what their lives are like in the cost of living. Then we have the power. The power of the striking workers derives from their union and resolve. If they're able to stand firm, they will win. They will always win. But it's not as straightforward as just saying all you have to do is stand firm and you'll win, because striking means doing without your already meagre pay. I mean, if rail workers could afford to strike indefinitely, like the barristers did, they would win without question. You wouldn't need the strike to last even a month before there was a pay offer. But they can't afford it. The government's power, on the other hand, is in not being personally affected by the impacts of the strikes in financial terms. They still get paid their salaries as MPs and ministers. This isn't like the owner of a business, who's going to be watching their profits melt away as the strike action goes on. The Tory ministers don't care. The country suffers the economic impact, not them. So they don't care. It's public opinion which weakens the government's hand. Individual Tory MPs being told by their constituents, I voted for you, but I'm not happy with the way the government are dealing with this. They need to do better. They will then put pressure on ministers to improve their office. And we can see that happening right now. And right now, the Tories think that public opinion amongst the voters they care about is not against them, with most of the strikes taking place, which is why they're quite happy to just sit them out. So they're holding firm. But they also see that the target voters are siding with the nurses. I suppose it makes sense. Not everyone uses trains. Not everyone needs the police. Not everyone even cares much about the postal service. If something there's a week's delay in getting your post, not a lot of people may not care about that. But nurses, everyone needs a nurse from now and then. And everyone also understands that when you need a nurse, you need a nurse. And the nurses see this as well, which is why they are toughening up their line. And from a practical point of view, this is a strategic error from the government. Regardless of what you think about the politics, this is a terrible cock-up from the government. It is a failure to properly consider how public opinion was shaping up. Now, a couple of months ago, they may have thought to themselves, look, or even a month ago, they may have thought to themselves, look, we can face all these down. Okay, but at the end of last month, the polling showed, as I said, a big surge in support for nurses. The government at that point should have gone, hang on a minute, this could be a bit of a trip hazard for us. But this is because instead of considering public opinion strategically, they are compelled to act along ideological lines. The government should have paid attention to that surge in support for nurses, and they should have headed off these strikes before they began. Now, unless something happens to shift that momentum away from nurses, the government are going to be forced into a humiliating U-turn. And that will potentially strengthen the resolve of others involved in strikes. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.